Welcome to our Oracle Class 312. Today is the 16th of September, 2024, and I am happy to have everyone with us today. Our guest today is Natasha. And Natasha, I never can say your last name properly, so I will let you help us to pronounce it.
That's okay. It's Bajema.
Bajema, all right, that's
Mhm.
easy enough. I mean, come on, I can say Smith. I ought to be able to say Bajema. Well, welcome. Glad to have you here. Now, you can share your screen if you need to and like. And remember, folks, I want to know if you've got any ideas about what you'd like to see next time. Please bring those up. And as always, we are happy to have any comments, questions, or suggestions as we're going through. And we're just glad that you're here with us today. And we will get started as soon as I stop this share. All right, I got us back now. And I don't see anyone else needing in. All right, Natasha, let's start by having you talk about your education just a little bit. Where are you coming from educationally? And then start talking about your career. Uh, you may have something to talk about before working with the Department of Energy, but I want you to focus on that a little bit as we get started. Okay?
Okay, sure. So hi everyone, good morning. My name is Natasha Bajema. I have a couple of different graduate degrees, one from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies on international policy. And there I started my focus on weapons of mass destruction. That was 24 years ago, believe it or not.
Oh my, time flies, doesn't it?
Yes, and so after I got my master's degree, I did a stint at the United Nations in the WMD office in New York City, and also a year at a think tank at NYU. And then I went off to Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts, at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and I got my PhD in international relations. And I wrote my PhD dissertation on nuclear weapons proliferation. So you can start to see a theme here. I got my first job out of that degree, actually, while I was still working on my dissertation at the National Defense University, which is a professional military education institution. It's the Department of Defense, essentially. So I started working at the Department of Defense in 2008. And there I did any number of things. I did research on weapons of mass destruction for our colleagues in the Pentagon. I also taught senior military officers and civilian equivalents at NDU. And that was pretty fun because they were 10 years older than me when I first started. And then by the time 10 years had passed, I was their age again. So that was fun. And I spent 3 of those. So I was at the DoD for 11 years, and I spent 3 years on detail assignment at the Pentagon. And then the Pentagon decided to detail me to the National Nuclear Security Administration, which is part of the DOE, the Department of Energy, for 1 year. So that was a lot of fun. I left DoD in 2019, and I moved out to Texas, hoping to make it to California to start a new career in TV and film. I got to Texas and I live on the Gulf of Mexico, and it's very beautiful here and a lot cheaper and a lot less people. And so I was like, well, until I get my sense of where I'm really going, I'll just stay here for a moment. And then in March of 2020, of course, everything shut down with the global pandemic. And so I was going to be stuck here for a while, and then Hollywood shut down. So I was like, well, there's no time. This is the worst time to start a brand new career in TV and film. And so I went back to what I know, WMD. I started doing some consulting and eventually took a job with a think tank in DC working remotely during the pandemic. And I'm now at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies, which is affiliated with Middlebury College. So this is where everything started for me back in 2000. And I'm now a senior research associate, and my focus is on artificial intelligence mostly.
Oh, wow. What a great career you have described to us. You had involvement in weapons and mass destruction in a unique sort of way, which is the reason that if the reason we met is because Natasha came on her tour of looking at sites of where weapons of mass destruction were being uh, created or I don't want to say utilized, but potentially utilized. And she did that all across the nation. And of course, one of the sites that she wanted to see was Oak Ridge. So I had the good fortune to give her a tour of Oak Ridge, and well, she did a lot of the tour herself. But we met and talked and had a good relationship in Oak Ridge about Oak Ridge, and obviously we'll want you to talk about that some too. And then we've continued to stay in touch, and we'll, as we go through this uh, program today, and Natasha, just so you know our time frame, we will end at it'll be at 10:40 your time, so we'll go until 40 minutes until the next hour. So, where would you like to begin to set the stage for what what you have
Yeah.
done with nuclear weapons?
Yeah. So quick clarifying question. So 10:40 Eastern time or 10:40 Central?
10:40 Eastern time.
Okay. Okay. That's 9:40 my time. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Um,
Sorry, I forget about time change, but you're
no
right,
worries. No worries.
9:40.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, to maybe I should talk a little bit about the radioactive road tripping trip. So I mentioned that I quit my DOJ job in 2019 and moved to Texas, and then the pandemic hit, kind of interrupting my grand plan. My parents didn't think it was such a grand plan to start a whole new career in TV and film after I was so successful. So, well, I thought it was a grand plan. And so I think I just in 2021 started to get restless about how I was going to make a transition into TV and film. I had spoken to experts in Hollywood who basically encouraged me to stay as far away from California as possible if I ever wanted to be successful in Hollywood, which is very counterintuitive, but they said, everyone comes to Hollywood who wants to make it big in Hollywood, and the key is to pretend like you don't need Hollywood. I'm like, okay. And these were like really well-informed individuals that have all the connections in the world. So I had the good fortune in my career to meet Max Brooks, who's the author of World War Z, was made into a film with Brad Pitt, if you recall. And he is the son of Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft. So he is Hollywood royalty, and he would know. And he said, look, I have the right name. I can get into any door in Hollywood, and I can't succeed in Hollywood. So I was gonna like, oh, if he can't, then maybe I can't. It's a really hard field to, it's probably as hard to break into as my field. And it's really hard to do it in your mid-career, because going back to the beginning and working for, peanuts again, living in Los Angeles probably doesn't sound very exciting to people in my age group, mostly. So I knew that maybe moving to Hollywood was no longer the right decision, even though we were in a global pandemic, and I was getting restless. And I was like, well, I had always had the dream of owning an RV and traveling about the country. I had done a lot of camping as a kid, and I came up with this idea. What if I toured all the nuclear weapons related sites and facilities around the country with a camper and my dogs, and then I put it on YouTube. Well, originally I was going to produce a show, but then I got talked down by some Hollywood experts saying, yeah, this is going to be hard. Why don't you just like put it on YouTube? I'm like, okay, great idea. And so I went about the planning for my trip, which was extensive. I had to buy a camper. I had to get the right truck for a camper. I had to think through all of the, marketing, the planning. And so I had this grand idea that I was going to travel for an entire year in 2022 around the country, visiting nuclear weapons related sites. I planned it meticulously. And I bought a brand new camper, which should mean that that should work. And took off on January 1, 2022. And on January 16, 20 things had broken on my brand new camper, including the AC, which was going to become necessary. And it was still pandemic. We still had all the supply chain issues, if you remember. And I was in Florida at the time, so I made it all the way to Florida. And I called around, and because my camper was bought in Texas at a dealer in Texas, I didn't have priority at any dealers in Florida. So the earliest they could get me in to look at the camper would have been March. It was January 16, March. And so I kind of did the math very quickly and realized that if I wanted to do this trip, I was going to have to go all the way back to Texas, take my camper to the dealer and get it fixed. So that was a really, really, really tough blow. I mean, there could have been a lot of terrible things that happened, like an accident, things like that. But to turn around after just getting started, and it was, I was 15, 6, no, it was more than 2,000 miles. I don't know how far I was. I was all the way down in the Everglades National Park. So I wasn't at the panhandle or anything. I was like way down.
Way down.
And to make that trip back, and also, I was doing my day job. So my boss at the time was kind enough, because I was working remotely. Sure, as long as you do your job, I don't care where you do it from. So I had limited ability to drive every day. So it took me about 3 to 4 weeks to get back, which was how long it had taken me to get there about. And got back, put the camper in the RV dealer, and they got it back to me 3 months later. So all the momentum, all of the like lead up to that trip, and just like to have to turn around so early, I have to admit, I didn't have the same enthusiasm the second time around. And so I relooked at my whole schedule and I shortened it significantly. So I decided I would do 5 more months, which was much shorter than I had planned. So I didn't get to see everything I wanted to see. And so I took off on my second trip on June 1, 2022. And started off, I went to actually Mississippi, which is a site that I had missed because I had to get in touch with the forest management folks, because it was the site, it was a testing site where they'd done 2 nuclear weapons tests in the ground in a salt dome in Mississippi, and it was now owned by the Forestry Management Department of Mississippi, state of Mississippi. And on my first trip, I wasn't able to get in touch with them fast enough to make that happen because I was already in Florida. But I was able to set up a meeting and got to visit that site, and that was really, really, really cool. So that was one kind of silver lining. And then after that, I went to Alabama, to Redstone Arsenal, but really visited the Rocket Museum they have there. And that was very interesting. And then I think my next site would have been Tennessee. So Oak Ridge, Secret City. And I was so fortunate to have heat domes follow me wherever I went across the country. If there was a heat dome in the summer of 2022, I was camping underneath it. And so we had a heat dome in Oak Ridge, and it was 113 degrees. So it was very hot. And yeah, that's how I ended up in Oak Ridge. And I was so fortunate to be connected to you, Ray. I don't remember how we were connected.
Well, I got a call from the the National Nuclear Security Administration folks saying that you were coming, that you had asked for, what you could do while you were in Oak Ridge. And they asked me if I would meet up with you and help you to see what Oak Ridge had to offer. So I agreed to
Yeah.
that and made the connection with you, and we got started.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for reminding me. It feels like so long ago now. And so very fortunate to get the I think best tour of the secret city you could possibly have. So many stories and background. And I had known because I've been a nuclear weapons expert for more than 20 years. I had known all about Oak Ridge. I had studied the Manhattan Project and I knew the history, but I think knowing the history of a facility and then actually driving the length of the secret city, like I guess I didn't, even though I knew the history, I didn't realize that they had shut down, like moved people from farms and shut down this enormous space
Yeah.
for use by the government, and then had these checkpoints. And I think when you see it and experience it in person, it's a completely different
Right.
um yeah, and that's what I wanted to show on YouTube, because I believe that Americans don't like to think about nuclear weapons for obvious reasons. um but I think they also don't realize how much we are surrounded by nuclear weapons related facilities, and how we are unfortunately threatened with the loss of everything that we hold dear on a daily basis. As long as these terrible weapons exist, I don't know if we can ever get rid of them, but as long as they exist, we are at risk of losing everything. And so it was interesting to see and experience and learn about people who had already lost so much,
Mhm.
as a result of nuclear weapons being brought into our history in the 1940s. So, Ray, I don't know, what else do you want me to talk about?
No, no, that is good, and you might, or for the class, I will find that YouTube that she posted about her time in Oak Ridge, and I'll include that as a link when and send that out to you. I should have gone ahead and gotten it and put it up on the chat, but I didn't, so I'll get it to you later. Um, you began to reflect a bit on Oak Ridge and on your uh, impressions. I know that you and I talked about what to do next, and what you were planning at that time was, as you say, putting these things up on YouTube, and you've done that. So let's go further in your trip. What other places did you visit during those 5 months?
Yeah, so I went to Ohio next. I went to the Air Force Museum, and they have the largest collection of planes and missile
Mm.
models and warhead models. And wow, was that impressive. I don't know how many miles I walked that day. I think it was like 5 miles.
Yeah,
That's
that's
how,
been
and I was running through it too, because I was kind of, again, because I'm doing my day job, I was kind of on a time pressure to get all of my footage. And I think I ran like 5 miles through that place. It was so impressive. Definitely worth a stop in Dayton, Ohio. And so then I went on to, and part of my desire to kind of go on a road trip was to, reconnect with family and friends that I'd been disconnected from during the pandemic, and doing it via camping rather than flying just seemed like a better, more safe route. And so I stopped in Michigan, where I'm originally from, and saw friends and family there. There are some interesting kind of radar sites in Michigan, as well as former Nike Hercules sites, but just remnants. So I didn't actually stop at any of those. I went through the UP and then into Wisconsin, and then on to Minnesota, where a lot of my family live there too. So that was kind of a
Yeah.
non-nuclear moment. Although there's a lot of things I could have done. I was kind of limited again in terms of time and mileage. I think I drove 15,000 miles in total, and I went to over 22 states. I can't remember. I'd have to count them up again. But my next journey was really, really interesting. I went to Badlands
Yeah.
National Park, which I actually was one of the first places I ever went to camping as a kid. And that kind of was what, my memory that, oh, I want to go do this, RVing thing again. Or we didn't have an RV then, we had a like pop-up camper, but, and Badlands National Park has a really great missile site there, and you can go down in and see the missile. I unfortunately, it was so restrictive with the pandemic that I don't think I could go, or if they opened it up and then I wasn't quick enough on the draw, because these are high in demand sites. But they have a number of different sites where you can go see, where there's a missile silo and you can look down in it, and then there's facilities, launch facilities there. But all the missiles that I think I understand are now unactive in South Dakota.
That's
I
right.
think they're not there anymore. There's like 4 states that have the missile silos now that are active. I think it's Wyoming, Colorado, Montana. Is Nebraska the 4th one? I can't remember. I'd have to go look. Maybe North Dakota. North Dakota would be the 4th one. I think. And so that was, and I was under heat dome, by the way, and it was exceptionally windy. We had like 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts coming across the highway in South Dakota, and there is no barriers there outside of the Badlands, but that's kind of like lower down.
Yeah.
And so that was a pretty treacherous path. And then I went to Montana, and I think for me, Montana was one of the most memorable spots. I went to my memory's failing, Great Falls, Montana, where they have the Moms Air Force Base. That's where they operate out of. We have about 400 nuclear armed missiles. I think it's 400, not 450. 400 nuclear armed missiles still active in the United States, and that Air Force Base is one of the bases that actually serves as the main control Air Force Base. And they have a great little museum there that gives the history of intercontinental ballistic missiles. But camping, kind of knowing that I'm surrounded by 200 nuclear armed missiles, was an interesting thought experiment. I was very intentional about it. I mean, I think most people don't want to think about the nukes if they're around them, but I wanted to think about what that must be like, to be a resident of Great Falls, Montana, and to be surrounded by, and to know that if a nuclear war starts, nothing is going to be there anymore. Because with Russia, at least, or with China, because those missiles will be taken out in one of the first strikes. And the reason being is that the adversary will want to limit the damage to their own country, and so they'll have to take out these missiles as soon as possible. They're easy to find, they're hardened, but they're easy to find, and that's why they'll be taken out right away. The submarines and bombers, they're harder to find, because if the bombers take off and the submarines are underwater, so these are the ones they can definitely take out. And it's such a beautiful state, and Great Falls is not too far from Glacier National Park, so that was my next stop. And I was so fortunate to be under heat dome again. So it was 96 degrees in Glacier National Park. I got heat stroke in Glacier National Park.
Oh no. Wow.
Things you don't, Montana, up in the mountains, it was probably the sun, the distance to the sun was shortened, and I was on a boat on the big lake there. And so I probably just didn't take that into account. So I got a little overheated, but again, the heat followed me everywhere. And then drove through Idaho and then on to Washington to Seattle. And we have just off the coast of Seattle, we have nuclear armed submarines that hang out there. Bangor, I think. I think it's in Bangor. But I did go out there and I did look out over the water where the nuclear armed ballistic missile submarines would be leaving and coming back in. Even though I had once DoD top secret clearance, nobody really let me anywhere close to the nuclear weapons site. So I had to kind of do it as a tourist, which I think worked out because that means that anybody who's following my travels on YouTube can do the same thing that I did. And there's a really cool naval museum there that kind of goes over the history of all of that. But it was interesting to be in such a beautiful area, beautiful large city, knowing that there are nuclear weapons just right there. And again, a lot of those ports, you know, the two ports that we have the nuclear armed submarines operating of would be targets in the first phase of a nuclear war as well. And so it's thinking through what that would look like for the folks, citizens of Seattle. And then I went down through Oregon. I stopped in Oregon. Beautiful state, doesn't have much nuclear, believe it or not. And but I did go to Crater Lake National Park, and then I headed to California. And California has a lot, actually. They have a number of Air Force bases. They have Vandenberg Air Force Base down in LA, where they still do a lot of the missile tests out of. They have Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, which is part of the US nuclear complex. Livermore is, I think, where the hydrogen bomb was developed. Is that correct, Ray?
Yes, that between there and of course Los
Los
Alamos,
Alamos.
but Livermore had the primary lead. Yeah.
And I had the good fortune of visiting Livermore as a DoD employee. So I've already been to Livermore. I've seen all of their cool laser facilities and everything, but couldn't get to Livermore this time. Now that I'm on the outside, but knowing that, so that's in the Bay Area, and then kind of gone down to Los Angeles area, and then cut across to Las Vegas, where you have the US nuclear testing site. And I was under another heat dome, and it was 115 degrees in Las Vegas in September. And I couldn't, the problem with camping, if you know about camping, even though you have an AC unit, is the camper, when it's that hot, never cools down. And so every subsequent day in those temperatures is even hotter. And so inside the camper, despite my AC, it was still 94 degrees.
Oh no.
And I went to the museum there, but I think I was trying to get to the see the testing site, and unfortunately they were closed down due to the pandemic. I eventually got another date to go see it, but then couldn't make it to Las Vegas. So that was like in 2023. I couldn't make it there for some reason. Anyway, I could not stay. I planned to stay longer and kind of do some more nuclear atomic tourism and get some more photos. It was just too hot. I could not be outside. And the dogs, they could not be on the cement. There was cement, and in Vegas, there's cement everywhere. There's very, very little grass. Right. And so I looked around, and there was a heat dome over the entire southwest part of our country. And the only place where it was not over 100 was Flagstaff, Arizona. So I went to Flagstaff and benefit of having a camper, I went to Flagstaff and listened to everyone complain about 90 degrees. And I was just like, oh, finally it's cool. But yeah, so then I went to the Grand Canyon, and the Grand Canyon is an area with a lot of uranium mining. I know that there's a contested area right now. I haven't looked at the latest, but I know that the local population is very much against extracting uranium from that area. And then I went to Utah and to Bryce Canyon and Arches National Park. And Arches is interesting. So Utah is really important from the nuclear perspective, is because they were downwind of a lot of the atmospheric tests. And so they were exposed to a lot of the radiation coming from those atmospheric tests. And there are a lot of people suffering from cancer, very much likely due in part to those tests. And that was in the 1950s when the US was testing above in the atmosphere. And they stopped doing that in 1960s, or well, I think their last one was 1960, but they signed the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963 with the Soviet Union. Because by that time they kind of realized that the radiation in the atmosphere wasn't a good thing. And so, but Utah is also, Utah, Colorado, that area is very, they have a lot of uranium deposits. And there was a uranium deposit that was being cleaned up right outside Arches National Park. And if you didn't know what you were looking at, you're looking at a mound of dirt. You wouldn't know that you were looking at a mound of dirt covering uranium tailings that is being cleaned up by the US Department of Energy. And so I did get footage of that as well. And actually, I'll talk a little bit about what will happen next, because I did not finish releasing all of my footage. Life got a little bit in the way, but I'm planning to revisit radioactive road tripping in 2025 with a new project. But so Utah, then I went through Colorado, and so I'm kind of heading home now. But in Colorado, we have the Cheyenne Mountain. We have the NORAD, that's the North American US Ray, do you know what the NORAD stands for?
Oh no, I knew you were going to ask me.
I'm sorry. Anyways,
I'm kidding.
NORAD, you know, it tracks Santa. It's the command and control
Yeah.
command for nuclear weapons. And I was able to visit. I went into Cheyenne Mountain when I had DoD clearance.
It is North American Aerospace Defense Command.
Thank you. I can never get this one right because I've only ever talked about it as NORAD. But that's where they basically, one of the main command and control centers. So if there is an incoming nuclear attack, you know, NORAD's going to pick it up. I was in their command center back when I was a DoD employee, could not get onto it anymore, but okay. And so I saw their whole command center. I was actually in the mountain, which is their secondary site, kind of down deep in Cheyenne Mountain. And so to create the story around Cheyenne Mountain, I actually went up to Pikes Peak, and you can see the top of Cheyenne Mountain from up in Pikes Peak. But by this time, I realized, or I knew very well, that above 6,000 feet, I struggle a lot. So in Bryce Canyon, I was okay. It was 6,000 feet. And then I was kind of at that altitude for a while. But in Colorado, when I had to camp, I thought I was camping west of Denver. I was west of Denver in the Rockies at 9,000 feet.
Yeah.
At 9,000 feet. And so I arrived at the campground and they had little oxygen bottles for sale. I'm like, I might have to get those later because I had to set up my camper, and just setting up my camper, I almost fainted. That's how my altitude. So I decided, this was all planned before I knew these things, but so I decided to go up to Pikes Peak, which is 14,000 feet.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I wonder how long I'll last, how long I'll be lucid up on Pikes Peak. I'd been up as a kid and I didn't remember having any issues. And so I went up to Pikes Peak, and sure enough, I mean, it probably was about 5 minutes outside the car, and I was like, oh. And so I got my footage. I used the bathroom, and I don't know if any of you have driven up Pikes Peak, but that road is one of the scariest roads that I've ever driven in my entire life. And now I have to drive down it kind of half drunk because of the altitude sickness. I made it back. But I have amazing footage that I can't wait to relive because I put a GoPro on the front of my car so you can see the drop-offs that I had to drive around. And I'm driving a dually. So I'm driving a 24-foot Super Duty Ford pickup truck with a dually. So, I mean, these are really narrow roads and oh my goodness. So got that footage. And then from Colorado, I went to New Mexico
Mhm.
and I went to Los Alamos, of course, and that's probably one of my favorite places to go. Unfortunately, I didn't get into the lab area or get on any official tours, but I did. You can go around Los Alamos and on a walking tour and learn a lot just on your own. I was in Oppenheimer's house. I was it was just again unbelievable. So the landscape around Los Alamos is some of the most beautiful landscape I've ever seen in my entire life. And just to imagine that this is where the bomb is the birthplace of the bomb. And so Los Alamos, then I went to Albuquerque has a great nuclear museum. And I've got my piece of Trinitite from the Trinity test. Very expensive, tiny little speck of Trinitite, but required nerd souvenir. And then I had planned basically the 5 months of my trip, mostly around October 15, 2022. And that's when they open up. I'm not like Ray, I don't get red carpets rolled out for me, but I had to go to the public opening of the Trinity site.
Yeah.
And again, that was, it's hard to explain. I think, Ray, I think you might have felt the same, you know, to be there, to know that this is where the bomb was detonated. And not far away from that, of course, you're on the missile testing facility that's still active today. But not far from that is the White Sands National Park. And if you've ever been to White Sands, it's a really, really, really kind of special, also very hot place to be. If it's hot and then the White Sand, but we did take my dogs and I, because it's very dog friendly, White Sands, you can take the dogs up the dunes. And but you have to be very careful not to get lost, because when you cross over a dune, everything is just white
Yeah.
everywhere.
Mm.
And so you have to remember which way you came, and your footprints disappear. It's like it's maybe like the Sahara or something, you know, comparable. But and so by that was kind of the last major visit. And but I still had miles and miles and miles to go from New Mexico all the way to the Gulf in Texas. So it took me probably another week to get home. But that's kind of the sum of my trip. And
Okay.
I think I mentioned this to you, Ray, that I had planned to do the video while I was on the road,
Mhm.
and I had a video snafu. You know that I start feeling old when I don't get tech anymore, because I grew up in the tech, you know, space of the 80s and 90s, and this is where tech struck me. I have this on my big Mac. I have this huge Mac that I took with me to do all the video work, and it had optimized storage checked on. And that what that means is that it decides if you don't need files or if they're too big, it'll put them on the cloud for you. How handy, how lovely, how wonderful, except that I was traveling and I had limited gigabytes, like literally 50 gigabytes per month of internet, and that's it. That's it. And so while I was on a video call with my colleagues, because of course I had to have the gigabytes also for my job,
Yeah.
my Mac was working very, very steadily in the background, uploading all of my GoPro video from the Secret City,
Mhm.
from all of my travels in June up to the cloud. Well, it was no longer on my hard drive anymore. So
Right.
in order to get access to it, I actually had to download it. And we're talking about gigabytes and gigabytes. So I ran out of internet that month. It was July 2022. And halfway through the month, I had no more internet. Well, at high speed, then it turns down to snail speed.
Yeah.
And you can't do any video work. So not only was all my stuff hijacked onto the cloud, I couldn't work on it, my GoPro footage, because it was when I shut it down, kind of in between uploading to the cloud and leaving my hard drive, it went to some sort of limbo land where I couldn't find it on my hard drive and I couldn't find it on the cloud. And I thought I had lost all of my footage from the Secret City tour and everything. And I was so crushed. And I couldn't find out if I had not lost it until I stepped in the door of my house in October of 2022, several months later, and got my internet, my
Right.
hardwired internet back to see. And all of a sudden it appeared on my computer. It was like in some limbo land, some Mac limbo land or something.
Uh,
So I got back and I tried to continue to put out the footage. So you can see the YouTube channel has a number of videos that I did put up. But then life intervened and I got a lot of other projects that I had to work on. But I'm planning to pick it up again in 2025. I'm planning to do, so essentially what happened, I got a different job,
mm,
a
yeah.
lot of things. And then I got selected as a merit artist at the Rockport Center for the Arts. I do visual arts on the side as well. And so the award is, here you have a show and now you have to go produce all of these works. So I've been very busy this past year working on mixed media collage on birds because I live here in the Gulf of Mexico. But my plan is in 2025 to do a collection on radioactive road tripping, mixed media collage combined with my photographs, combined with my videos. And then I'm going to pitch it to a couple of places and then try to have a show in a couple of cities around the country.
Well,
So,
great. And keep Oak Ridge on your potential list. I would love to work with you to see if we can make some arrangement to get you to East Tennessee with that
well,
show.
that'd be great. That
All
would be
right.
great.
I have a couple of quick questions. First one, can you see that book?
Yes. Yep. I'm familiar.
Have you read the book?
I haven't read it. I have read blurbs of it. I
Okay.
find it difficult to read books written by, she's an expert in her own right, but she's not a 20-year expert. So I
Okay.
find it difficult because I get irritated. It's like watching a movie on nuclear stuff. So,
I understand. And for the class, this is Annie Jacobson's Nuclear War. Excuse me. And it's actually only about the 15 minutes that would happen after an airstrike, saying that if China launched uh, ballistic missiles, or if North Korea is where they actually say that it may come from, but and Russia. What happens in the first 15 minutes when a large number of ballistic missiles show up in the atmosphere? And she does interview people who've been in the positions over the past years to make those kinds of decisions. So it's I read it during a 4-hour layover in Paris airport. So
oh, how.
now speaking of books, I think if I'm not mistaken, let me get this up to where everyone can see it. I hope. I think if I'm not mistaken, this may be the most recent book you published. Rescind Order.
No, no,
No.
that was published in 2020. I've published one, two, maybe three Sunstone, four. I don't
Okay,
know.
you're looking around. Talk a little bit about your publishing career. What books have you written, and what are they about?
Yeah, so I wanted to be a writer. I was an artist as a kid, so that's where the mixed media art comes in. But I was highly discouraged from pursuing art as a career, both by my parents, my grandparents, and anyone who was concerned about me making money. And I see their point now. I do, when I'm surrounded by a community of artists who have made a living with art, and it's really hard. Um, but I also wanted to be a fiction writer from an early point. And I got caught up in my career and was too busy, but I started to get images of novels when I was working at National Defense University in Washington, D.C., come to me. And so I would start jotting down these ideas. And after I left the Pentagon, I had more time, and I thought, I should really just try and, write a novel and see what happens. So I started writing some fiction in 2016, and the first novel I wrote called Nuclear Conspiracy has never seen the light of day. It was too complicated, and when I sat down to edit it, I was like, I've written from 5 different points of view. It was just too challenging. And so I started off with something more simple, a single point of view mystery series. So that's called the Laura Kingsley series. My main character is former special forces private investigator who basically solves a murderer book, but it's all tied together in a larger conspiracy theory. And I wrote the first 3 books in that series. I'm about to start books 4 and 5, so I'm just right now rereading that, and I'm happy to say that I'm not cringing. So these are my first novels, and I worried that I would cringe many novels later.
Oh,
And so then in 2019, I left the Department of Defense, and I was very concerned. I was working, kind of starting to look at the AI plus nuclear space then, and a couple of deterrence experts wrote an article in a blog, a very famous blog, War on the Rocks, saying America needs a dead hand. And a dead hand is a reference to a Soviet automated system for launching nuclear weapons if their leadership were taken out in some sort of first strike, or they were unable to launch a retaliatory strike against the United States. But it's an automated system launching thousands of nuclear weapons. And, Dr. Stanley Kubrick made fun of it in the movie called Dr. Strangelove. He called it a doomsday machine. They didn't have one then, but Stanley Kubrick had thought of, well, we should have a doomsday machine. It's the ultimate assurance that the launch will be ordered as intended, because a lot of concern existed around would the officers who have the button, control the button, launch the nuclear forces if ordered by the president. And so the system was called the dead hand. It's also called perimeter if you want to look it up. According to recent sources, the system appears to still be active with Russia, which is not very reassuring. And so these experts were basically saying America needs a dead hand. So America needs automated nuclear command and control. And I was very worried about that idea and decided I'd write a novel. So I wrote Rescind Order to think about a more tedious scenario in which AI plus nuclear could go wrong. So we've seen these movies before. Terminator is one. What was that one with Matthew Broderick, was it called War Games? War Games. It was made in 1980.
yes, War Games.
Mm-hmm. There have been others. Colossus is a lesser known one. So there have been a number of movies that have been made about when you bring AI, artificial intelligence, into the nuclear weapon systems. But because I was diving into artificial intelligence and I understand how those systems work, I was worried about some very tedious scenarios, like data bias. Do we have enough data to be able to build a system around nuclear command and control and things like that? So I wrote up a scenario in Rescind Order, and the idea was I wanted to actually write a screenplay, but I'd never written a screenplay before. And so I've written novels before, so I'll write the novel first and then write the screenplay. So that's where Rescind Order came about. And actually, I'm going to Belgium tomorrow to talk to NATO, mid-career officials at NATO. And I will be talking about Rescind Order because I'm giving a talk on integrating artificial intelligence into nuclear command and control and communications. And on Thursday.
Well, give us a preview of your talk. How does artificial intelligence play into our nuclear strike capabilities as it stands today?
Well, a lot of these systems, so I think the first thing to note is that nuclear command and control is not one unified integrated system. It actually, based on open sources, consists of more than 200 subsystems. Many of these will be on computers or involve data in some regard. But if you know anything about computer systems and computer systems that were developed by different companies, are they going to be easily integrated? And the answer is definitely not. I mean, I think, all the code is not easily integrated. And so there are a lot of reasons why the US government would want to integrate AI into a lot of these subsystems because they're very data driven. And when we're talking about responding to a nuclear attack, the president has a maximum of 30 minutes to make the decision. That's a maximum. And I think Annie Jacobson does a really good job in the portions that I've read of helping Americans to understand how little time there is to make this life and death decision. And if the nuclear missiles are launched from a submarine, 8 minutes. Okay,
Yeah.
so if it's like closer to us, it's going to be a lot closer. And so, for example, with nuclear planning, so back in the 1960s, Eisenhower instituted the SIOP, Single Integrated Operational Plan. I think that's it, SIOP. And it's since been replaced by more adaptive planning because we have more computer capabilities, more data. It would make sense to integrate AI into that to get better adaptability of nuclear war plans. So once a nuclear war starts, you need to be able to adapt to the situation that's actually unfolding. And a single plan that was pre-planned isn't going to cut it. And so the preview is that the US government is going to integrate AI into many of these subsystems, but I don't think it is realistic to anticipate that in the next 10 years we'll have a single automated integrated. And there's a lot of reasons not to do that, right? So in my book, I envisioned the scenario in which the US government automated the nuclear command and control from receiving the warning that a nuclear attack is incoming to devising nuclear options kind of in real time to address that incoming nuclear attack, to sending the launch order to the nuclear forces around the country to then launch the nuclear weapons. All of that in my book is automated, but the president still has the full authority to launch nuclear weapons, and they have 8 minutes and 53 seconds to rescind the order. So that's where rescind order comes into play. So it kind of flips the script a little bit on how things are done today. Today, the president has a launch order. You've probably heard about the black suitcase, which they call the football, that goes with the president wherever he or she goes, and allowing the president to be able to make that decision wherever they are very quickly.
So,
And yeah.
so we have a policy called launch on warning. What can you say about that?
Well, I don't know. Is that current policy, Ray?
According to Annie Jacobson, it is.
Oh, well, I think I'm no longer DOD, so
I know.
I guess I can say what I want now. I think the US government will say they don't have a policy of launch on warning, but I think in practical terms,
Yeah.
it is launch on warning.
Yes.
Because if you think about the incoming nuclear attack, let's say it's, from Russia. If it's Russia, it's going to be thousands. If it's China, it's going to be hundreds.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about something inconsequential. I mentioned the 400 silo-based nuclear weapons in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and North Dakota. Those are vulnerable in the sense that Russia knows where they are.
Yes.
So they're going to take out those first. If we want to be able to use them, we have to launch them.
Right.
And that's called a use or lose pressure that the president's going to face, that if we don't use them, and so that's 400 nuclear armed missiles, and it's quite a significant number given our much smaller arsenal these days. So back in the 80s, 400 was not very large number because we had 5,000 or 6,000 ready to go.
We actually produced over 30,000 nuclear weapons during the Cold War. We're down, I believe, to somewhere around 2,000 now. I don't know the exact number.
We have about 4,000 or 5,000. Not all of those are deployed.
Oh,
So
yeah,
under the
I'm talking deployed, but I don't
yeah.
know the exact number. So anyway, that's a rescind order is something that I enjoyed because of what you did an excellent job writing it. And then of course Annie Jacobson, I enjoyed reading that as well. Let me ask you and I encourage folks, we have about what 10 minutes left here. So if you want to ask her questions, just unmute yourself and ask. I want to ask about the site in Mississippi. I have never heard of it until you told me about it. Tell me what is there now, and it was underground.
Yeah. It was underground, 2 underground tests. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact years, but I think they were in the 1960s. They followed the limited test ban treaty that the United States signed with the Soviet Union. And there was a concern within the US government that now that they could not do atmospheric testing, would they be able to understand the Soviet nuclear weapons program? So you learn a lot of information from testing data that we were afraid that we were going to lose. And so they wanted to do underground tests and see if they could pick up the seismic activity, if we could still detect whether the Soviet Union was detonating bombs under the ground. And so this site was chosen. It's a salt dome. I'm not a scientist. I know that the salt dome was fairly protected from the groundwater, and there was all sorts of reasons why they chose this particular site. And they dug basically a very narrow hole into the ground all the way down a couple thousand feet. I'd have to look up the exact data, but it was underground, might have been several, like 4,000, I don't know how many thousand feet underground, until they reached this area, this hollow area in the earth. And then they stuck a nuke down there and detonated it. And the data that they got confirmed that we can indeed detect seismic, we can detect underground nuclear tests.
Okay.
And so we've had, I think no one has tested a nuclear weapon since, well, North Korea has been blowing stuff up. But I mean, beyond North Korea, the US hasn't tested, I think, since 1992.
That's correct.
And we've been doing simulated tests and whatnot, but yeah. So what was your question? Oh yeah. So basically what it looked like, it looked like a field. There were trees, beautiful, beautiful trees. Again, it belonged to the forest management department. So this beautiful forest. And there was like this, it looked like a cement, one of the round things on the road. What do they call those? One of those iron round kind of covers for the sewer system. What do they call those?
Yeah. Well, just a cover.
Yeah, just a cover. So it was raised kind of out of the ground, so I could step onto it. On. So I stood on it, and I have a picture of my feet on the tube that went down. So
all right. Yeah. So that's what it was used for, to determine if we could detect underground explosions of nuclear weapons by Russia. Do any of you others have some in the class? Please unmute yourself and ask a question of Natasha if you have anything you'd like to know. She has an astounding career that she's been associated with nuclear weapons in many different ways. She's worked inside the system, and she's also been a tourist to visit the site. So ask your questions.
So there's been a lot of concern about nuclear weapons in Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, as I understand it, as part of a settlement for other things. What's the scuttlebutt going around about the concern that Russia might utilize tactical weapon of some kind in Ukraine? How is that being assessed, and anything you know there have heard about that?
Yeah, so back in 2022, when I think that's when this started, right? The war, was that in 2022, February 2022? No, 2023?
Yeah, it must have been 23.
2023, not 2022, 23. No, it was 2022. That's when I came home, and we were worried about Putin. So I think especially, I mean, the concern about Putin's using nuclear weapons has fluctuated over time. The first few months, there was a lot of scuttlebutt. There was a lot of, like, back and forth, what will he do? And, Putin and various high-level folks from his administration have, in various occasions, threatened the use of nuclear weapons. And I think it was in the spring of 2023 when he actually said he was going to move some tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus, and that caused yet another kind of like phase of everyone being concerned. I've always been concerned about, and I'm surprised actually that this conflict has taken so long. I've been concerned about Putin being backed into a corner, and whether he might use tactical nuclear weapons. I mean, how I feel about that kind of varies. I think, he'll get more, the rhetoric will get hot for a moment, and that scenario will come back up. It's hard to know, because Putin ultimately has control, and he can do that if he wants to do that. The fact that he hasn't done it yet makes me less concerned that he'll do it. I think that he would be worried about the Western response to that, NATO and the US response. I feel sorry for the current administration every time they have to think about this, because if Putin were to use a tactical nuclear weapon, it would not be wise for us to use a nuclear weapon, but it almost be necessary. So it's an extremely challenging situation, because in order to maintain deterrence and to maintain the fear of strategic nuclear war in response to using a nuclear weapon, we would almost have to respond with nuclear weapons. And that, of course, opens up the potential for an exchange between Russia and the United States. So I think in answer to your question, over the last couple of years that this conflict has gone on, you'll see a flurry of activity. I have no idea what's going on in the White House, but I imagine every time there's a heightened sense of threat, they have more meetings about what we might do in response to Putin doing this or Putin doing that, and I'm sure they're doing little war games behind the scenes.
Wow, thank you for that response. And thank you, Jim, for the question. Are there any other questions from the class members? This is a unique opportunity now. Don't hesitate.
Don't be shy.
Please don't be shy.
I just have a quick question.
Okay, Terry, please.
I didn't know about the underground nuclear testing, so I'm finding this very interesting. Has the U.S. government determined that there's been other underground nuclear testing with that system? Have we been able to determine that other countries are doing that?
North Korea. So most countries have not had nuclear tests. I think beyond North Korea, China was the last country to do a nuclear test, and I don't know when it was, maybe 1996 or something. But North Korea has only done underground nuclear testing. And what's interesting about this is that in the 1990s, the US government and other governments negotiated the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which was signed in 1999, but it has yet to enter into legal force, which means it's not a legally binding treaty. However, as part of the treaty instrument, they created an organization called the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, CTBTO, which actually exists in Vienna. And as part of their operations, they have installed sensor networks all around the world in countries that are basically state parties to this treaty. Many of them have definitely adopted the treaty legally. The US and other countries haven't, and there's a very narrow stipulation on when the treaty can enter into force. It has to be certain number of countries, certain countries. And that system is operational today, and it has a lot of benefits beyond just identifying underground nuclear tests. It detects seismic activity, basically any acoustic activity that happens underneath the Earth's surface. And so that's operational today. So it's actually very interesting.
Interesting. Good. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Appreciate it. Anyone else?
Well, I kind of following up on that. Back when India and Pakistan were developing or thought to be developing nuclear weapons, there was some underground tests and things. And are we pretty confident that we can detect or determine whether an explosion, a seismic event, is actually from a nuclear source or is from a conventional chemical explosion that's made to look like a nuclear explosion?
Absolutely. So there was that major explosion. It was a chemical explosion in Lebanon. I don't know if you remember, a couple of years back, it was a massive explosion, and they are absolutely able. So every seismic event, whether it's like an earthquake, whether it's a nuclear detonation, has very distinct patterns. And the nuclear detonation is very, very distinct compared to other types of detonations.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Not to mention radioactivity. So there's also, even though it's underground, I think there's radionuclides that are released, and they can detect those as well.
Any other questions for Natasha?
Well, this is not a nuclear question. It's just a curiosity. How did the dogs enjoy the trip?
Oh, well, my two dogs, the Boston Terriers, they absolutely loved it. Of course, they're very easygoing dogs, and I have a lot of times where I've done photo shoots with them. They're not really cooperative when it comes to photo shoots, but I have pictures of them overlooking Crater Lake. I have pictures of them with the Devil's Tower in the background. Yeah, they had a great time. They love new things, new smells.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nancy, for that question. Natasha, just to be sure that I give these people the correct YouTube channels and everything that you would like for them to see, would you mind to send me an email? I know you're getting ready to go to leave tomorrow for your trip, and I'm amazed at the things that you're able to do. But if you would send me an email that says, "Hey, here's what I'd like for them to look at," Ray, then I'll include that when I transfer it on. Now, what we will do, we will post this video up on YouTube on my channel, and the people in the class that are not here today can get to it that way. I won't do any editing. It just goes up just like it is. And I'll send you a link to it as well, Natasha.
Okay,
all right.
great.
One more
Wonderful.
comment before we end. Next week, we have with us Emily Strasser, who has written the book, The Half-Life of a Secret. It's very much about her grandfather in Oak Ridge, and he was involved at Y-12. He actually ran the lithium production process for the hydrogen bomb. And it'll be an interesting discussion, very much focused on her experience in trying to learn about what her grandfather did. So come and join us again next Monday morning, and we'll see you. We'll see you then. Thanks for being with me.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you, Natasha. I can't explain how much I appreciate you being with us this morning, and have a good trip, okay?
Thank you. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.